Woodworking is a contemplative practice for me, and it's a practice that helps me set my mind straight, but I think also carries on, as of course we hope contemplative things do. But the nice thing about woodworking is that you make something that is part of your contemplative practice, but then that object that you make is something that either you or someone that you give it to uses, and hopefully serves as a contemplative purpose for them. And I think part of the contemplation is that you're working with a natural substance. You're working with wood, and you're making something that is pretty, that's useful, like this little scoop made out of Oregon myrtle wood, or a little spoon made out of the same kind of wood, or something more elaborate like this dipper made out of western red cedar. And these are things that as you use them, they remind you of the process, they remind you of the material that you're working with, they remind you of the tools that you used to make them, they remind you of your own energy and skill and your hands in doing that work. Speaking of tools, you can do things, the things I've shown you here. Some of them take some rather specialized tools, but what I'm going to do today is make just a little butter spreader, jam spreader or something, out of a little stick that I cut in my backyard yesterday from a Texas persimmon tree. And I'm going to use really just probably maybe one or two knives. You can spend a whole lot of money on woodworking materials and particularly tools, but you don't have to. Probably the main knife I'm going to use today is this French open-eel knife. These are called French peasant knives. They cost about $15 to $17. Very nice steel in them. They fold up and they lock so that they're closed. And then when you open it to work with it, you can also lock it so it doesn't fold up on you. You don't want a knife that's going to fold up over your hands. And you can see I've kind of decorated this one. That's what we do with our tools. We like to do things with them. Here's what the knife looks like when it's out of the factory, but I have to customize them. This one here, I just burned it with a torch, and kind of a Japanese finish called shoshugiban. And so you can do a lot of things with these. My intent today is not to show you how to carve or whittle, though that's what I'm going to be doing. But what I want to do really is just let you know that you can do these kind of things easily and simply and gain a lot from it as a contemplative process, as a craft that you can enjoy. So I'm going to use this open-eel knife and this piece of wood and just whittle away at it like this. I'm wearing a glove. It's a fillet making glove, and it has steel threads in it, so that if I slip, which I sometimes do, not very often, but reduce the chance that I'll cut my finger. I started doing this when I was at least 6 years old, and have a few scars to show for it, but not many. I'm not going to tape the whole process of making this, because this is the kind of thing you might spend a day on or a few hours. You don't want to hurry this, and I certainly don't want you to have to sit there and watch me carve the whole thing. So I'm going to go ahead and carve it, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Well, it took me about an hour to carve this, including making little fancy grooves on the handle. And the way I designed it, with the crook in the little branch, you hold it like this and spread it on your bread. You don't have to bend your hand down so much. This is made out of green wood, so it has to dry some before I can sand it and make it smooth and put an oil finish on it. And with green wood, there's a possibility of it that it may crack. It's thin enough, it shouldn't, but that can happen in using green wood. I carved it all with this one open heel knife that I mentioned. Did the whole thing with that. Well, the question comes to be, so what? I carved a butter knife. You carve a butter knife. What in the world? Why would you want one? What do you do with it? It is symbolic of, I think, some very important things. One thing that has guided me in my life, something I learned in graduate school many years ago, was the idea that we can make the ordinary into the extraordinary. Make the ordinary into the extraordinary. The things that we take for granted, the things that we don't pay any attention to, actually, when we think about them, are quite extraordinary. Just being alive, taking a step, taking a breath, seeing with our eyes, talking, making something like this. Those are fantastic. Those are tremendous capabilities, tremendous things we can do. And lately in this time of stress in our country with the pandemic and with government dysfunctions and so forth, I've not been frightened, but I certainly am challenged. We're threatened. And my response to that has been to make me think of life as sweet and precious in a way that I never have before. But what does that mean? How does that work? How in the world does a little wooden butter knife relate to that? Well, let's imagine a couple of scenarios. I carved this with a French knife. I like France, southern France particularly. I like all of France, all of it I've seen. But let's just imagine that we are in Provence, and we have our little butter knife. We've got a little basket of bread and butter and the kinds of things that we want to have for a picnic. We've got one of those little French open heel knives. They make very good picnic knives. And we have found a place overlooking a small river, fast-flowing, clear river, flowing over the limestone. We find a big limestone kind of bench to spread out our picnic on. And downstream is an old Roman bridge, arched bridge made out of limestone. Beautiful setting. It's quiet. So we have our meal there, and we use our little butter knife for spreading butter. If you eat butter on bread, whatever it is you want on your bread, some good artisan bread, just one of my favorite things in the world. Okay, most people would say that's a pretty good vision. The south of France is one of those special places, but that can happen right in your own backyard. That can happen right on your own balcony, right in your own carport, right in your own whatever it is. It doesn't have to be the south of France. It is simply a matter of paying attention to the things that are there and making the ordinary into the extraordinary, the richness of life that's there. I think if we did that, I think if we learned to do that, many of the things that drive us to have, I want this new thing, I want this latest telephone, I want a new car, I want whatever it is we want. That's what our society is based on, is that kind of continuous consumerism. It's destructive. We can't live that way. We can't continue to live that way. It is not sustainable. But if we find our satisfaction in those simple parts of life, those simple things that we do all the time, but that we forget about and we don't realize how precious they are, then we might have a much more enjoyable life, and one that does not have some of the threats that we have normally.